Harlan Boone stepped into his barn before sunrise and froze. A horse stood trembling in the center aisle, ribs showing through dull coat, legs shaking, eyes hollow with exhaustion. He'd locked that barn himself the night before. No gate was open, no trailer tracks in the dirt. Someone had brought her here in darkness and vanished. Taped to her halter was a handwritten note, the ink smudged with what looked like tears. "Her name is Scarlet. I'm dying. Please don't let her die too." In 40 years of ranching, Harlan had seen plenty of trouble, but nothing like this. If you want to see how one desperate act changed everything, stay with me until the end, and drop a like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Harlan Boone had always been a man of routine. Every morning for the past 40 years, he'd wake at 5, pull on his boots, and walk the same dirt path from his house to the barn. The ranch wasn't big, 20 acres of scrubland and patchy grass in the high desert outside a town called Prospect Ridge. But it was his, and he knew every inch of it. He knew which fence posts leaned, which water troughs needed cleaning, which hens laid eggs, and which ones just ate feed and complained. He knew the sound of his own gate, the creak of his own barn door, the particular smell of hay and horse sweat that greeted him every dawn. So when he pushed open the barn door that October morning and saw the mare standing there, he knew immediately that something was very, very wrong. She was a chestnut, or had been once. Now her coat was dull and patchy, stretched tight over ribs that showed like fence slats. Her legs trembled, her head hung low. She didn't move when he stepped inside, didn't even flick an ear. Just stood there in the center aisle, swaying slightly, as if the effort of standing was almost more than she could manage. Harlan stopped in the doorway, his hand still on the latch. His mind ran through possibilities. Gate left open? No. He'd locked it himself last night. Fence down? He'd walked the property yesterday afternoon and hadn't seen a gap. Someone's horse got loose and wandered in? Possible, but unlikely. Prospect Ridge was remote, and the nearest neighbor with horses was 5 miles off. He took a slow step forward. The mare's eyes tracked him, but she didn't startle, didn't retreat, just watched him with a kind of exhausted resignation that made his chest tighten. "Easy," he said quietly. "Easy now." He moved closer, keeping his hands low and visible. Up close, she looked even worse. Her hooves were cracked and overgrown. Her mane was matted with burrs. There were old scars along her shoulders, faint white lines that spoke of poorly fitted tack or rough handling. But it was her eyes that got him, dark and glassy, filled with a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. And then he saw the note. It was taped to her halter with clear packing tape, a single sheet of lined paper folded once. The handwriting was shaky, the letters uneven, as if the person who'd written it had been struggling just to hold the pen. Some of the ink had run, smudged by what looked like water or tears. Harlan peeled the tape carefully and unfolded the paper. His hands, rough and calloused from decades of ranch work, felt suddenly clumsy. "Her name is Scarlet. She's 12 years old. I don't have much time left. The cancer's in my lungs and liver now, and the doctors say it's a matter of weeks, maybe days. I can't take care of her anymore. I tried to find someone, but no one would take her. The rescue places are full. My daughter won't answer my calls. I don't have money to board her, and I can't stand the thought of her going to auction. Please, if you're reading this, don't let her starve. Don't let her end up in a kill pen. She's all I had. I'm sorry to leave her like this. I'm sorry for everything." There was no signature, no phone number, no return address, just those words written in a hand that had clearly been shaking, and the desperate hope that whoever found the horse would do the right thing. Harlan read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. He looked at the mare, at Scarlet, and let out a long, slow breath. "Well," he said quietly, "guess you're staying." None. By the time the sun came up, Harlan had checked Scarlet over as best he could. She had no obvious injuries, no fresh wounds, just the deep, grinding exhaustion of a body that had been running on empty for too long. He gave her a small handful of hay, not too much, in case her stomach couldn't handle it, and filled a bucket with fresh water. She drank greedily, then stood with her head low, breathing hard. Harlan leaned against the barn wall and watched her. His mind was already running through the costs. Vet visit, farrier, feed, supplements, medications if she needed them. He wasn't a wealthy man, The ranch brought in just enough to cover expenses, and some months it didn't even do that. Martha, his wife, kept the books, and he knew she'd have questions when he told her about this. But he also knew he couldn't walk away. Whoever had left Scarlett here had trusted him, trusted a stranger, because they'd run out of options. That kind of desperation didn't come from carelessness. It came from being backed into a corner with no way out. He pulled the note from his pocket and read it again. I'm sorry for everything. Harlan had seen a lot of things in his life. He'd seen droughts that killed cattle. He'd seen families lose their land to banks. He'd seen good people make bad decisions because they didn't have a choice. But he'd never seen someone leave a piece of their heart in his barn and walk away. He tucked the note back into his pocket and headed for the house. Martha was at the kitchen table when he came in, a cup of coffee in her hands and the local paper spread out in front of her. She looked up as he walked in, and her expression shifted immediately. What's wrong? She said. Harlan poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. Got a situation in the barn. What kind of situation? There's a horse in there. Martha set her cup down slowly. Harlan, we don't have a horse. We do now. He told her everything, the barn door, the mare, the note. Martha listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Let me see it, she said finally. He handed her the note. She read it twice, just like he had, and then set it down on the table between them. She's in bad shape, Harlan said. Real bad. I don't know if she'll make it. And if she doesn't, then we tried. Martha looked at him, her blue eyes sharp. And if she does, what then? Then we figure it out. Harlan, we can't afford another mouth to feed. I know. The hay prices went up again last month. We're already running tight. I know. And you're still going to do this? It wasn't a question. Harlan met her gaze and nodded. Martha sighed and picked up her coffee. You're a damn fool, Harlan Boone. Probably. But you're my damn fool. She stood and walked to the window, looking out toward the barn. Call Dr. Hewitt. Tell him we need him out here today. Dr. Evan Hewitt arrived just before noon, his truck rattling up the dirt driveway with a trailer full of veterinary supplies. He was a lean man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm, steady demeanor that put nervous animals at ease. He'd been the only large animal vet in the area for the past 20 years, and Harlan trusted him more than most people. Martha said it was urgent, Hewitt said as he climbed out of the truck. It is. Harlan led him into the barn. Scarlett hadn't moved much since morning. She'd finished the hay and the water, but now she just stood in the same spot, her head low, her breathing shallow. Hewitt stopped in the doorway and let out a low whistle. Where'd she come from? Someone left her here last night. No warning, just a note. A note? Harlan handed it over. Hewitt read it, his jaw tightening. Jesus, he muttered. He handed the note back and moved toward Scarlett, his hands already reaching for his stethoscope. Let me take a look. For the next 30 minutes, Harlan and Martha stood back and watched as Hewitt worked. He checked Scarlett's heart rate, her breathing, her temperature. He ran his hands over her legs and ribs, palpated her abdomen, examined her teeth and gums. The whole time, Scarlett stood quietly, too tired to resist. Finally, Hewitt straightened and pulled off his gloves. Well, Harlan said. She's severely malnourished, Hewitt said. Dehydrated. Underweight by at least 200 pounds, maybe more. Her hooves are a mess. She's probably got some pain in her feet and legs from walking on them like that. No obvious illness, but I'd want to run blood work to be sure. Will she make it? Hard to say. If we can get some weight back on her and get her hydrated, she's got a chance, but it's going to take time. Months, probably. And there's no guarantee. Harlan nodded slowly. What's it going to cost? Hewitt hesitated. For today? 200 for the visit and the exam. Blood work's another 100. If she needs meds, that's extra. Long term? He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Feed, supplements, farrier work. You're looking at a few thousand, easy. Maybe more. Martha glanced at Harlan. He didn't look at her. Do it, he said. Harlan, do it, Evan, whatever she needs. Hewitt nodded. All right. I'll take the blood samples now and get them sent off. In the meantime, keep her on small. Frequent meals, good quality hay, a little grain if she'll take it. Make sure she's got fresh water at all times. And keep an eye on her. If she goes down, call me immediately. Understood. Hewitt packed up his gear and headed back to his truck. Before he left, he turned to Harlan. You're doing a good thing here, he said. A lot of people wouldn't. Harlan shrugged. Don't feel like I had a choice. That's what makes it good. Cool. Over the next few days, Harlan fell into a new routine. He woke earlier than usual, checked on Scarlett before he did anything else. He fed her small portions of hay every few hours, measured out grain by the cupful, refilled her water bucket twice a day. He stood with her in the barn while she ate, talking to her in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular. The weather, the chickens, the fence he needed to fix on the south pasture. Scarlett didn't respond much at first. She ate because the food was there, drank because she was thirsty. But slowly, over the course of those first few days, something shifted. Her head came up a little higher. Her ears flicked forward when he walked into the barn. She started to watch him, not with fear or suspicion, but with something closer to curiosity. Martha noticed it too. She's starting to trust you, she said one evening as they stood together at the barn door, watching Scarlett nose through a pile of hay. Maybe, Harlan said, or maybe she's just too tired to be scared anymore. Don't sell yourself short, she knows you're trying to help. Harlan didn't answer. He wasn't sure what Scarlett knew or didn't know. All he knew was that every time he looked at her, he thought about the woman who'd written that note. The woman who'd loved this horse enough to leave her with a stranger rather than let her suffer. The woman who'd died alone, knowing her last act was a gamble on someone else's decency. It sat heavy in his chest, that thought, heavier than he'd expected. A week after Scarlett arrived, Harlan drove into town to pick up a bag of senior horse feed from the co-op. The place was busy. Saturday morning, farmers and ranchers stocking up on supplies. And he had to wait in line at the counter. While he waited, he overheard a conversation between two men standing near the seed display. Heard the Murrays had to put their gelding down last week, one of them was saying. Couldn't afford the vet bills anymore. That's the third one this month, the other man said. People are running out of options. Yeah, well, what are they supposed to do? The rescues are full. The shelters won't take them. And good luck finding someone who wants to take on a horse that needs work. It's a damn shame. Harlan paid for his feed and loaded it into the truck. As he drove home, he kept thinking about what he'd heard. The third one this month. How many more were out there? How many more horses were being abandoned, put down, left to starve because their owners couldn't afford to keep them and couldn't find anyone to take them? He thought about the note in his pocket. The rescue places are full. My daughter won't answer my calls. This wasn't just one desperate woman. This was a pattern, a failure, a system that left people with no good choices, and he didn't know what to do about it. 2 weeks in, Scarlett started to look better. Not healed, not by a long shot, but better. She'd put on a little weight. Her coat had started to regain some of its shine. Her eyes were brighter, more alert. When Harlan walked into the barn, she nickered softly, a sound so unexpected that it stopped him in his tracks. Martha laughed when he told her. See, she knows you. She knows I bring food, Harlan said. It's more than that. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Harlan didn't let himself think too hard about it. He just kept showing up, kept feeding her, kept talking to her. And slowly, piece by piece, Scarlett came back to life. But the note never left his pocket, and the weight of it never got any lighter. One evening, as he was closing up the barn, he pulled it out and read it one more time. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry too, he said quietly, to no one in particular. Then he folded the note, tucked it away, and headed back to the house. There was work to do. The blood work came back on a Thursday. Harlan was mending a section of fence near the western pasture when Martha walked out with the cordless phone in her hand and a look on her face that told him the news wasn't simple. Hewitt just called, she said. He wants to talk to you. Harlan set down the wire cutters and wiped his hands on his jeans. What did he say? He didn't. Just said he needed to go over the results with you directly. That didn't sound good. Harlan took the phone and pressed it to his ear. Evan? Harlan got the blood work back on Scarlett. And? There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that meant the vet was choosing his words carefully. She's anemic. Protein levels are low. Kidney function's borderline, probably from prolonged dehydration. Liver enzymes are slightly elevated, but nothing critical. So she'll be okay? With time and proper care, yeah. She should recover. But here's the thing. These numbers, they didn't happen overnight. This horse has been neglected for months, maybe longer. Whoever had her before, they weren't just struggling at the end. They were struggling for a long time. Harlan looked back toward the barn, where Scarlett was visible through the open door, standing quietly in her stall. You think they knew? I think they didn't have a choice, Hewitt said. Look, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've seen it before. People love their animals, but life gets hard. Medical bills pile up, jobs disappear, hay prices double. And suddenly, keeping a horse isn't just difficult, it's impossible. Most people don't want to let go. They just don't know what else to do. Harlan didn't respond right away. He thought about the note, the shaky handwriting, the desperation soaked into every line. What do you tell people when that happens? I tell them to call a rescue. But like you already know, most rescues are full. They've been full for years, and it's getting worse. How much worse? Hewitt sighed. Last month alone, I had 3 calls from people asking me to put down healthy horses because they couldn't afford to keep them and couldn't find anyone to take them. Healthy horses, Harlan. Not old, not sick, just expensive. The words settled over Harlan like cold water. What'd you tell them? I told them I'd help them find a solution, tried to connect them with rescues, with other owners, with anyone who might take the horse. Most of the time, I failed. And then? Then they made a choice, and it wasn't a good one. Harlan closed his eyes. He could picture it. People standing in their barns, looking at animals they loved, knowing they were out of options, making a call they didn't want to make, doing something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives because the alternative was worse. There's got to be something, Harlan said. If there is, I haven't found it yet. After the call ended, Harlan stood in the pasture for a long time, the phone still in his hand. The wind moved through the dry grass, carrying the smell of dust and sage. In the distance, he could hear the chickens clucking, the faint creak of the windmill turning near the water tank. Everything about this place was familiar, predictable, manageable. But standing there, he felt like he was looking at a problem too big to fit inside the boundaries of his small ranch. Martha came up beside him. What'd he say? Said she'll recover, but it took a long time to get her this bad. That's good news, isn't it? For Scarlett, yeah. He looked at her. But Evan said there are more out there, a lot more. People calling him to put down healthy horses because they can't afford them and can't find homes. Martha's face tightened. How many? He didn't give me a number, just said it's getting worse. They stood together in silence. Finally, Martha spoke. What are you thinking? I don't know yet, Harlan said. But I can't stop thinking about that note, about the woman who left Scarlett here. She didn't want to give up. She just ran out of options. So what do you do about that? I have no idea. But the question stayed with him. It gnawed at him while he finished the fence, while he fed the chickens, while he sat at the dinner table that night picking at Martha's pot roast without really tasting it. He kept thinking about the woman's words. The rescue places are full. My daughter won't answer my calls. And he kept thinking about what Hewitt had said. Most of the time I failed. Late that night, after Martha had gone to bed, Harlan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a pad of paper. He started writing down everything he knew. The facts, the problems, the gaps. Rescues were full. People couldn't afford care. There was no support system for families on the edge. Healthy animals were being put down because there was nowhere else for them to go. And then he wrote a question at the bottom of the page. What if we didn't wait until people were desperate? He stared at it for a long time. Then he folded the paper, tucked it into his shirt pocket next to the note, and went to bed. The next morning, Harlan drove into Prospect Ridge and stopped at the feed co-op. He found the owner, a grizzled man named Carl Drummond, behind the counter sorting invoices. Carl, you got a minute? Carl looked up and grunted. For you? Maybe. What do you need? Information. You hear things in here, right? People talking about their ranches, their animals, what's going on in their lives. I hear plenty. Most of it's complaints. Carl set down his pen. Why? You ever hear anyone talking about getting rid of horses? Not selling them, getting rid of them, because they can't afford to keep them. Carl's expression shifted. Yeah, more than I'd like. How often? Often enough that it's not a surprise anymore. He leaned back against the counter. Had a woman in here 2 weeks ago asking if I knew anyone who'd take her mare. Said she couldn't keep up with the feed costs and her husband had just lost his job. I told her to try the rescue down in Fairfield, but she said they were full. She left without buying anything. Haven't seen her since. You know her name? Didn't ask. Harlan nodded slowly. What about others? You know anyone else in that situation? Carl scratched his jaw, thinking. There's Tom Yates, lives out past the ridge. He's got a gelding he's been trying to rehome for months. No takers. And Jenny Carver, she's got 2 horses she can barely feed. Her kid's sick. Medical bills are piling up. She told me last week she's thinking about taking them to auction. Auction? Yeah. And you know what happens at auction? If they don't sell for riding, they sell for meat. Harlan felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many people are we talking about here? Rough guess. Carl was quiet for a moment. In this town? Maybe a dozen families I know of. Probably more I don't. That many. Harlan, times are hard. Hay's expensive, vet bills are expensive, and people are barely scraping by as it is. A horse isn't a luxury anymore. It's a liability. And when you're choosing between feeding your kids and feeding your horse, the choice is pretty clear. Harlan thanked him and left. As he drove home, his mind was racing. A dozen families in one small town. And if Prospect Ridge was like this, what about the next town over? The next county? The whole state? The problem wasn't just big, it was everywhere. That afternoon, he sat down with Martha and told her everything. I think we need to do something, he said. Martha looked at him across the kitchen table. Like what? I don't know yet, but there are people out there in the same situation as the woman who left Scarlett. People who love their animals but can't keep them. And there's no help, no support, just nothing. And you think you can fix that? I think I can try. Martha folded her arms. Harlan, we can barely afford 1 extra horse. How are you going to help a dozen families? I'm not saying I take all the horses. I'm saying maybe there's a way to help people before it gets to that point. A way to support them so they don't have to give up. How? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Martha studied him for a long moment. You're serious about this? Yeah, I am. She sighed and shook her head. You know you're insane, right? Probably. And you're going to do it anyway. Yeah. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Then I guess we're both insane. Over the next 2 weeks, Harlan started asking questions. He talked to people at the co-op, at the diner in town, at the post office. He asked about horses, about costs, about struggles. And the more he asked, the more stories he heard. There was a retired teacher named Linda whose pension didn't cover the cost of keeping her 2 mares. There was a ranch hand named Miguel who'd taken in a starving horse from a neighbor and now couldn't afford the vet bills. There was a single mother named Beth whose daughter had begged for a pony, and now Beth was working 2 jobs just to pay for feed. Every story was different, but they all had the same ending. People backed into corners, out of options, facing impossible choices. Harlan started keeping notes, names, situations, needs. He didn't have a plan yet, but he had information, and information was a start. One evening, he was at the barn checking on Scarlett when he heard a truck pull up the driveway. He walked outside and saw Evan Hewitt climbing out, a folder tucked under his arm. Didn't know you were coming by, Harlan said. I wasn't planning on it. Hewitt held up the folder. But I've been thinking about our conversation, and I wanted to show you something. They went into the barn. Scarlett looked up from her hay, ears pricked forward, and Hewitt smiled. She looks better. She's getting there. Hewitt opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. These are intake forms from the rescue in Fairfield. I called them yesterday and asked how many horses they've turned away in the past 6 months. They sent me this. Harlan took the papers and started reading. The numbers were staggering. Over 100 horses turned away. Not because they weren't in need, because there was no room. That's just one rescue, Hewitt said. There are 5 others in the region, and they're all in the same situation. Full capacity, waiting lists a mile long, and no funding to expand. Harlan set the papers down on a hay bale. So what happens to the ones that get turned away? Best case, the owner finds a private home. Worst case? Hewitt shook his head. You don't want to know. I think I already do. Hewitt looked at him. You're planning something, aren't you? I'm thinking about it. What kind of something? Harlan hesitated. He hadn't said the idea out loud yet, hadn't fully formed it in his mind. But standing there in the barn with Scarlett watching him quietly from her stall, he felt the weight of it pressing down on him. The note in his pocket, the stories he'd heard, the numbers on the page. I'm thinking, he said slowly, that maybe we don't need another rescue. Maybe we need something different, something that helps people before they get desperate, before they have to give up their animals. Like what? I don't know yet. A network, maybe. A way to connect people who need help with people who can give it. Feed donations, vet care, temporary boarding, whatever it takes to keep families from losing their horses. Hewitt was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. That's a good idea. You think so? I think it's the first good idea I've heard in a long time. I don't know how to do it, though. I'm just a rancher. I don't know anything about running a network or organizing people or... You know how to show up. Hewitt interrupted. You know how to do the right thing even when it's hard. That's more than most people. Harlan looked at Scarlett, at the way her coat had started to shine again, at the strength slowly returning to her body. What if it doesn't work? What if it does? That night, Harlan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed next to Martha, staring at the ceiling, his mind running in circles. He kept thinking about the woman who'd left Scarlett, about her final act of trust, about the fact that she'd had no other choice. And he kept thinking about Hewitt's question. What if it does? Finally, he got up and went to the kitchen. He pulled out the pad of paper and started writing. Not notes this time, ideas, a plan. Something rough and incomplete, but real. By the time the sun came up, he had the outline of something. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to perfect. But it was a start. A week later, Harlan stood in the community center in Prospect Ridge, looking out at a room full of people. He hadn't expected this many. He'd put up flyers at the co-op, at the diner, at the post office, announcing a meeting to discuss support for local horse owners. He'd hoped for maybe 10 or 15 people. There were over 40. They filled the folding chairs, lined the walls, stood in the back near the door. Ranchers and retirees, teachers and truck drivers, people he knew and people he'd never seen before. All of them looking at him, waiting. Harlan's mouth went dry. He wasn't a public speaker. He wasn't good with crowds. He was a man who worked with his hands, who fixed fences and fed animals and kept to himself. But he'd started this, and now he had to follow through. He cleared his throat. Thanks for coming. I know most of you don't know me. My name's Harlan Boone. I run a small ranch outside town. And a few weeks ago, someone left a horse in my barn. He told them about Scarlett, about the note, about the woman who'd run out of options and made a desperate gamble on a stranger's decency. He told them about the conversations he'd had, the stories he'd heard, the numbers Hewitt had shown him. There are people in this room right now, he said, who are struggling to keep their animals, who are one vet bill away from losing them, who love their horses but don't know how much longer they can hold on. A few heads nodded. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. And there are rescues out there trying to help, but they're full. They can't take anymore, so people are stuck. They're making choices they don't want to make, and animals are suffering because of it. He paused, looking out at the faces in front of him. I don't have all the answers. I'm not even sure I have any answers. But I think we can do better. I think we can build something here, a network, a support system, so that people don't have to face this alone. So that when someone's struggling, they have somewhere to turn before it's too late. The room was silent. Harlan felt his heart pounding. Then a man in the back raised his hand. What kind of support are you talking about? Whatever's needed, Harlan said. Feed donations for families who can't afford it. Volunteers to help with care. Temporary boarding if someone's going through a rough patch. Vet care, farrier work, whatever keeps the animal healthy and the family from giving up. A woman near the front spoke up. Who's going to pay for all that? I don't know yet, Harlan admitted. I'm hoping we can figure it out together. Maybe donations, maybe fundraising, maybe we all chip in a little and make it work. Another voice, this one skeptical. And what if it's not enough? What if people take advantage? Then we deal with it, Harlan said. But I'd rather take that risk than do nothing. A man in the second row stood up. Harlan recognized him. Tom Yates, the one Carl had mentioned. The man with the gelding he couldn't rehome. I've been trying to find a home for my horse for 6 months, Tom said, his voice rough. I've called every rescue within 200 miles, posted ads online, asked everyone I know. No one wants him. He's older, he's got arthritis, and he's not good for much except standing in a pasture and eating hay. But he's been with me for 15 years and I can't, his voice cracked, I can't just let him go to auction. The room was dead silent. I don't know if this network thing will work, Tom continued, but if there's even a chance it could help people like me, I'm in. Slowly, others started to speak. A woman who'd been trying to care for her late mother's mare, a man whose daughter's pony had medical issues, a retired vet tech who wanted to volunteer her time. One by one, people shared their stories, their struggles, their willingness to help. And Harlan stood at the front of the room, listening, and felt something shift. This wasn't just his idea anymore. It was theirs, all of theirs. By the time the meeting ended 2 hours later, they had the beginnings of a plan, a volunteer list, a donation system, a network of people committed to helping each other. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't anywhere close to perfect, but it was real. As people filed out, a woman approached Harlan. She was small, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes. I'm Jenny Carver, she said. Carl at the co-op told you about me, I think. Harlan nodded. The one with 2 horses and the sick kid. That's me. She looked down at her hands. I was going to take them to auction next week. I didn't want to, but I didn't see another choice. And now? She looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes. Now I think maybe I don't have to. Harlan didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Jenny reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered. Then she turned and walked away. Harlan stood there for a long time after everyone had left, the community center empty and quiet around him. Martha came up beside him and slipped her hand into his. You did good, she said. We'll see. No, you did good. They walked out together into the cool evening air. The sky was turning orange and pink, the sun sinking behind the hills. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The world kept turning, same as it always had. But something had changed. Harlan could feel it. As they drove home, he thought about Scarlett, about the woman who'd left her, about all the people who'd shown up tonight because they were scared and desperate and looking for hope. He didn't know if this network would work. He didn't know if they could save every horse, help every family, fix every problem. But he knew they were going to try. And that, for now, was enough. The first test came 3 days later. Harlan was in the barn replacing a broken latch on Scarlett's stall door when his phone rang. The number wasn't one he recognized, but he answered anyway. Mr. Boone, this is Rachel Kimball. I was at the meeting on Saturday. Harlan remembered her, a thin woman in her 30s who'd sat near the back and hadn't said much. What can I do for you? I need help. Her voice was tight, strained. I've got a gelding, 16 years old. He colicked last night. The vet came out this morning and said he needs surgery or he's not going to make it. But the surgery costs $5,000 and I don't have it. I called the rescue in Fairfield, but they said they can't take him. I don't know what else to do. Harlan closed his eyes. $5,000. That was more than the entire network had even talked about raising. Where are you located? About 10 miles south of town, off Highway 9. Give me an hour. I'll come out and take a look. He hung up and stood there for a moment, his mind racing. Then he called Martha. We've got our first case, he said. Martha was quiet for a beat. What do you need? I need to figure out how to come up with $5,000 in the next few hours. That's not possible. I know. So what are you going to do? I'm going to go out there and see what I can do. He drove out to Rachel's place, a small rented property with a sagging barn and a paddock full of weeds. Rachel met him at the gate, her face pale and her hands shaking. "He's in the barn," she said. "The vet gave him something for the pain, but he said it won't last long." Harlan followed her inside. The gelding was a bay, lying on his side in a stall bedded with straw. His breathing was labored, his eyes glazed. Harlan knelt down beside him and put a hand on his neck. The horse's skin was clammy, his pulse rapid. "What's his name?" Harlan asked. "Cooper." Harlan looked up at Rachel. She was crying, tears running down her face, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. "Tell me what the vet said, exactly." "He said it's a torsion, the intestine twisted. Cooper needs surgery to fix it, and even then there's only about a 60% chance he'll survive. But without surgery he'll die, probably within the next 12 hours. Harlan stood up slowly. "And you can't afford the surgery." "I've got $800 in my savings account. That's it. I already asked my family. They don't have it either." "What about payment plans? Did the vet mention that?" "He said the clinic doesn't do payment plans for surgeries. They need the money up front." Harlan looked back down at Cooper. The horse's breathing was getting worse, each breath a struggle. He thought about Scarlett, about the note, about the woman who'd had no options left, and he thought about what he'd said at the meeting. We can do better. But $5,000 was a hell of a lot of money. He pulled out his phone and called Evan Hewitt. "Evan, it's Harlan. I need you to do me a favor." "What kind of favor?" "I need you to call the clinic in Ridgemont and ask them if they'll take a horse for emergency colic surgery if I guarantee partial payment up front and the rest within 30 days. How much can you guarantee?" Harlan did the math in his head. His own savings account had about $3,000. Martha's had maybe another $1,000. $4,000, maybe 4 or 5 if I can scrape together some extra. "And the rest?" "I'll figure it out." Hewitt was quiet for a moment. "You're serious?" "Yeah." "Harlan, this isn't your horse. This isn't your responsibility." "I know." "And you're still going to do this?" "Yeah," Hewitt sighed. "Give me 10 minutes." Harlan hung up and turned to Rachel. "I'm going to make some calls. Don't give up on him yet." "I can't pay you back," she said, her voice breaking. "Even if you get the surgery, I can't pay you back. I don't have the money." "We'll figure it out." "How?" Harlan didn't have an answer for that, so he just walked outside and started making calls. He called Martha first. "I need you to pull everything out of our savings account." "All of it?" "Yeah, since..." "Harlan, I know, but I can't let this horse die because we didn't try." Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay, I'll go to the bank now." Next he called Tom Yates. "Tom, it's Harlan Boone. I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "I need money, fast. There's a horse that needs emergency surgery and the owner can't afford it. I'm covering most of it, but I'm short about $1,000. Can you help?" Tom didn't hesitate. "I'll bring it by your place in an hour." Harlan called 3 more people from the meeting. 2 of them said yes. One said she didn't have any money to spare, but she could spread the word. Within 45 minutes, Harlan had commitments for another $1,500. It wasn't enough, but it was close. Hewitt called back. "The clinic will do it. They want $4,000 up front and the rest within 30 days. But Harlan, if you can't come up with that remaining $1,000, you're on the hook for the full amount." "I understand. And if the horse doesn't make it through surgery, you're still on the hook. I understand. All right, bring him in. I'll meet you there." Harlan went back into the barn. Rachel was sitting on the floor next to Cooper, her hand on his shoulder, whispering to him. "We're taking him to Ridgemont," Harlan said. "The surgery's happening, but we need to move fast." Rachel looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "How did you—" "Don't worry about that right now. We need to get him loaded." It took 20 minutes to get Cooper into the trailer. He was weak, barely able to stand, and Harlan had to half carry him up the ramp. By the time they got him secured, Harlan's back was screaming and his shirt was soaked with sweat. Rachel rode with Cooper in the trailer. Harlan drove, his hands tight on the wheel, his mind running through everything that could go wrong. The horse could die before they got there. The surgery could fail. He could end up $5,000 in debt with nothing to show for it. But he kept driving. They reached the clinic just after noon. Hewitt was waiting outside with 2 vet techs and a gurney. They got Cooper unloaded and into the surgical prep room within minutes. Rachel stood in the hallway, watching through the window, her arms wrapped around herself again. Harlan stood beside her. He's in good hands. What if he doesn't make it? Then at least we tried. The surgery took 4 hours. Harlan spent most of that time in the waiting room, pacing back and forth, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine. Martha showed up halfway through with a bank envelope containing their savings. Tom Yates arrived 20 minutes later with $1,000 in cash. A woman Harlan barely knew from the meeting showed up with $250 and a bag of sandwiches. By the time the surgeon came out, Harlan had the full $5,000. The surgeon was a tired-looking woman in her 50s with blood on her scrubs and bags under her eyes. He made it through, she said. We were able to correct the torsion and remove the damaged section of intestine. He's stable for now. Rachel let out a sob. Is he going to be okay? The next 72 hours are critical, but if he makes it through that, his chances are good. Harlan felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but something close. He paid the clinic, counting out the cash and checks on the counter, while the receptionist watched with wide eyes. When he was done, his savings account was empty, and he owed money to 4 different people. But Cooper was alive. They stayed at the clinic until evening, watching Cooper through the observation window. He was hooked up to IV lines and monitors, his breathing steadier now, his eyes half closed. Rachel sat on a bench nearby, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Harlan sat down beside her. You did the right thing. I almost didn't call you, she said. I almost just let him go. I thought it would be easier. But you didn't. No. She looked up at him. Why did you do this? You don't even know me. Harlan thought about that, about Scarlett, about the note, about the woman who trusted him with her dying wish. Because someone needed help, he said, and I was in a position to give it. But you didn't have to. Yeah, I did. Rachel wiped her eyes. I don't know how I'm ever going to pay you back. Don't worry about that right now. Just focus on getting him better. They drove home in the dark, the trailer empty behind them. Martha was waiting at the house with dinner on the table, but Harlan wasn't hungry. He sat down in the living room and stared at the wall. You okay? Martha asked. I don't know. You did a good thing today. We spent our entire savings on a horse that might not even survive the week. I know. And I have no idea how we're going to make it back. Martha sat down beside him. We'll figure it out. We always do. Harlan looked at her. What if this happens again? What if there's another call tomorrow, another horse that needs help? We can't keep doing this. We can't keep emptying our savings every time someone's in trouble. Then we need to find another way. What way? Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You started something at that meeting. People listened. They showed up today with money because they believed in what you were doing. Maybe it's time to make it bigger. Bigger how? I don't know. But you can't do this alone, Harlan. You need help, real help, not just people chipping in a few $100s here and there. You need funding, organization, a real plan. Harlan leaned back and closed his eyes. She was right. He knew she was right. But the thought of trying to build something that big, something that organized, felt overwhelming. Still, what was the alternative? Keep doing what he was doing until he ran out of money? Until he couldn't help anymore? I'll think about it, he said. That night he couldn't sleep again. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Cooper in the clinic, about Scarlett in the barn, about all the other horses out there that were suffering because no one knew how to help. Finally, he got up and went to the kitchen. He pulled out his notebook and started writing again. Not ideas this time, a real plan, step by step. What they needed, how to get it, who to ask. By morning, he had something that looked almost workable. He spent the next week making calls, sending emails, meeting with people. He talked to local business owners about donations. He reached out to a nonprofit consultant in the next county who agreed to help them set up a formal organization. He organized another meeting at the community center, this time with a clear agenda and a proposal. The second meeting was smaller, about 20 people, But the energy was different. People weren't just showing up out of curiosity anymore. They were showing up because they wanted to build something. Harlan stood at the front of the room and laid out the plan. "We can't keep doing this the way we've been doing it," he said. "We can't rely on last-minute donations and empty savings accounts. If we're going to make this work, we need structure. We need a fund that people can contribute to regularly. We need volunteers who are trained and organized. We need partnerships with vets and farriers who are willing to work with us. And we need to be able to act fast when someone's in crisis." A man in the third row raised his hand. "That sounds like a lot of work." "It is," Harlan said, "but it's the only way this works long term." A woman near the front spoke up. "What about Cooper? How's he doing?" "He's recovering. Vet says he should be able to go home in another week." "And Rachel?" "She's doing okay, trying to figure out how to pay for his aftercare, but we're working on it." There was a murmur of approval in the room. Then Tom Yates stood up. "I think we need to talk about money," Tom said. "Real money. Not just what we can scrape together when there's an emergency. If we're going to do this right, we need a budget. We need to know what it costs to run something like this." Harlan nodded. "I've been working on that. Based on what we've spent so far and what I'm hearing from other rescues, I think we need about $20,000 a year to start. That covers emergency vet care, feed assistance, farrier work, and basic operating costs." Someone in the back let out a low whistle. "20,000? Where are we going to get that?" "Fundraising, grants, donations, local businesses." Harlan looked around the room. "I know it sounds like a lot, but if we're serious about this, we have to be realistic about what it takes." Another voice, skeptical. "And what if we can't raise that much? What then?" "Then we do the best we can with what we have," Harlan said. "But I'd rather aim high and fall short than not try at all." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a woman Harlan didn't recognize stood up. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. "My name's Eleanor Pritchard," she said. "I used to run a nonprofit in Ridgemont before I retired. I've been listening to what you're saying, and I think you're on the right track. But you need help. You need someone who knows how to write grant applications, how to manage donations, how to keep the books clean. If you're willing to let me help, I'm willing to do it." Harlan stared at her. "You'd do that?" "I would, because what you're doing matters. And I'm tired of watching animals suffer because people don't know where to turn." Another person stood up, then another. By the end of the meeting, they had a treasurer, a volunteer coordinator, and a committee dedicated to fundraising. They had a name for the organization, Hope Ridge Equine Support, and a mission statement. They had the beginnings of something real. As people filed out, Eleanor came up to Harlan. "You've got something good here," she said, "but you need to be careful. Once you formalize this, once you start taking donations and making commitments, people are going to hold you accountable. Are you ready for that?" "I don't know," Harlan said honestly. "But I don't think I have a choice." Eleanor smiled. "That's the right answer." Over the next few weeks, things moved fast. Too fast sometimes. Eleanor helped them file the paperwork to become a registered nonprofit. They set up a bank account, created a website, and started accepting donations. Local businesses began contributing, hay from the co-op, discounted vet services from Hewitt's clinic, gift cards for feed stores. And the calls kept coming. A family whose mare had foundered and needed special shoes. A man whose gelding had a tooth abscess and needed dental work. A woman whose pony had been neglected by a previous owner and needed rehabilitation. One after another, people reached out, desperate and hopeful. And Hope Ridge Equine Support showed up. They didn't save every horse. There were cases where the damage was too severe, where the kindest option was letting go. But more often than not, they found a way. They connected people with resources. They provided temporary feed support. They covered emergency vet bills. They kept families from having to make impossible choices. Word spread. The local newspaper ran a story. A radio station in Ridgemont did an interview with Harlan. Donations started coming in from outside the county, from people who'd heard about what they were doing and wanted to help. But with the growth came tension. Not everyone agreed on how the money should be spent. Some people thought they should focus only on emergency cases. Others wanted to expand into long-term care and rehabilitation. There were arguments about which cases deserved priority, about how much they should spend on individual animals, about whether they were doing too much or not enough. One evening, after a particularly heated committee meeting, Harlan sat in his truck in the community center parking lot, his head in his hands. Martha had stayed behind to talk to Eleanor, and he was alone. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Boone, this is Sarah Mitchell. You don't know me, but I need to talk to you about my mother. Can we meet?" Harlan stared at the message. He was exhausted, overwhelmed, barely holding it together. The last thing he needed was another complication. But he texted back anyway. When and where? The response came immediately. Tomorrow morning. The diner on Main Street, 8 a.m. Harlan drove home in silence. When he got there, Scarlett was standing at the fence, her head over the rail, watching him. She nickered softly as he approached. He walked over and stroked her neck. Her coat was sleek now, her body filled out, her eyes bright and alert. She looked nothing like the broken, starving horse that had appeared in his barn 2 months ago. "You started all this, you know," he said quietly. "I don't know if that's good or bad yet." Scarlett just nudged his shoulder, looking for treats. Harlan smiled despite himself. Then he went inside, where Martha was waiting with leftover stew and a tired smile of her own. "Rough night?" she asked. "Rough couple of weeks." "It'll get easier." "You sure about that?" "No," Martha admitted. "But we're not quitting, are we?" Harlan thought about the calls, the arguments, the empty savings account, the sleepless nights. He thought about Cooper recovering in Rachel's barn, about Jenny Carver's horses, still safe at home, about all the families who'd reached out because they'd heard there was help, finally, when they needed it most. "No," he said, "we're not quitting." The next morning, Harlan walked into the diner at 8 sharp. A woman was already sitting in a booth near the window, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes that looked like she hadn't slept much. "Sarah Mitchell?" Harlan asked. She nodded. "Thanks for meeting me." Harlan slid into the seat across from her. "Your text said this was about your mother." Sarah looked down at her coffee cup, her fingers wrapped around it like she was trying to draw warmth from it. "My mother died 6 weeks ago, cancer." Something cold settled in Harlan's chest. "I'm sorry for your loss." She had a horse, a chestnut mare named Scarlett. Harlan went very still. Sarah looked up at him, and her eyes were wet. "I think you have her." The diner went quiet around them, or maybe it just felt that way to Harlan, the noise of the other customers fading into a dull hum as Sarah's words settled between them like something heavy and breakable. "Yeah," Harlan said finally. "I do." Sarah exhaled, a shaky sound that might have been relief or grief or both. She looked out the window, blinking hard. "I wasn't sure. I've been trying to find her for weeks. I called every rescue, every vet office, posted on every online group I could find. No one had seen her. And then someone told me about your organization, and I saw the article in the paper. There was a picture of you standing next to a chestnut mare." She looked back at him. "That's her, isn't it?" "It is." "Can I see her?" Harlan nodded slowly. "Yeah. But first, I need to understand something. Your mother's note said you wouldn't answer her calls." Sarah's face crumpled. She pressed her hands against her eyes, her shoulders shaking. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then she lowered her hands and stared at the table. "I know what the note said. I know what she thought, and she was right." Her voice was hoarse. "I didn't answer. I saw her calling, and I let it go to voicemail over and over because I was angry, because we'd been fighting for months, and I was tired of it, and I just—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I told myself I'd call her back when I calmed down, but I didn't. And then it was too late." "What were you fighting about?" "Everything. Nothing. The cancer, mostly. She wouldn't do treatment. She said she was done fighting, that she just wanted to live whatever time she had left on her own terms. And I couldn't accept that. I kept pushing her to try another round of chemo, to see another specialist, to not just give up. We screamed at each other on the phone. I told her she was being selfish. She told me I didn't get to make her decisions for her." Sarah's hands clenched into fists on the table. The last thing I said to her was that if she wasn't going to fight, I wasn't going to watch her die. And then I stopped answering. Harlan didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. She left me 3 voicemails in those last few weeks, Sarah continued. I didn't listen to them until after she died. The first 2 were her asking me to call her back, saying she needed to talk to me about Scarlett. The third one, her voice broke. The third one, she said she understood why I wasn't answering. She said she didn't blame me. She said she loved me and she was sorry, and she hoped someday I'd forgive her for giving up. Sarah looked at Harlan, tears running down her face. She wasn't the one who needed forgiveness. The waitress came by with a coffee pot, saw Sarah's face, and quietly walked away. Harlan reached across the table and pushed a napkin toward her. Sarah took it and wiped her eyes, her breathing ragged. I found out she'd died from a hospice nurse, she said. I didn't even know she'd gone into hospice. By the time I got to her house, it was already being cleared out by the landlord. Everything was gone. Her furniture, her clothes, her pictures. And Scarlett was gone too. I thought maybe she'd sold her or given her to a neighbor, or... She shook her head. I didn't know what happened. I just knew she was gone, and I couldn't stop thinking that my mom died believing I didn't care. She knew you cared, Harlan said quietly. That's why she kept calling. But I didn't answer. No, you didn't, but people make mistakes, especially when they're scared. Sarah looked at him, her eyes red. Were you scared? When you found Scarlett? Harlan thought about that morning, the barn door swinging open, the starving mare standing in the center aisle. Yeah, I was scared she'd die before I could help her. Scared I'd make the wrong choice. Scared I'd let your mother down. You didn't. I didn't know that at the time. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sarah said, Can I see her now? Harlan paid for their coffee and they drove out to the ranch in separate cars. The whole way there, his mind was churning. He didn't know what Sarah wanted. If she was here to take Scarlett back, he didn't have the right to stop her. The horse had never been his. He was just the person who'd answered a dying woman's prayer. But the thought of losing Scarlett now, after everything, sat heavy in his chest. When they pulled up to the house, Martha was out front hanging laundry on the line. She looked up as they got out of their cars, her expression curious. Martha, this is Sarah Mitchell, Harlan said. She's the daughter, Scarlett's owner. Martha's eyes widened. She set down the laundry basket and wiped her hands on her jeans. Oh. Sarah was already looking toward the barn, where Scarlett's head was visible over the stall door. Is that her? Yeah. Sarah started walking before Harlan could say anything else. He and Martha followed a few steps behind. Scarlett saw them coming and nickered, her ears pricked forward. She looked healthy now, coat glossy, eyes bright, body filled out with good muscle. She looked like a completely different horse from the one who'd arrived 2 months ago. Sarah stopped at the stall door, her hand reaching out slowly. Scarlett stretched her neck forward and sniffed Sarah's palm, then nuzzled against her hand. Sarah made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Hi, girl. Hi, Scarlett. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She pressed her forehead against Scarlett's neck and started crying. Scarlett stood quietly, her ears flicking back and forth, as if she understood. Harlan and Martha stood back and let her have the moment. After a few minutes, Sarah straightened, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She looks amazing, Sarah said, her voice thick. I can't believe this is the same horse. My mom, she would have been so happy to see her like this. Your mother loved her, Harlan said. You could tell from the note. Scarlett was all she had after my dad died. She used to say that horse saved her life, gave her a reason to get up in the morning. Sarah stroked Scarlett's nose. And then she got sick, and everything fell apart. She couldn't afford the vet bills, couldn't keep up with the feed. She tried to get me to take Scarlett, but I live in an apartment in the city. I don't have space for a horse. I told her to sell her, but she wouldn't. She said Scarlett wasn't something you just sell. So she left her here, Ma, Harlan said. Yeah. Sarah turned to look at him. And you saved her. You did what I should have done. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have answered the phone. I should have been there. Martha spoke up, her voice gentle. Beating yourself up doesn't change what happened. But you're here now. That counts for something. Sarah looked back at Scarlett. I want to do something. I want to help. With your organization, I mean. I saw the article, read about what you're doing. It's exactly what my mom needed and didn't have. If I'd known about something like this back then, maybe... She stopped, shaking her head. Maybe it would have been different. We're still figuring it out, Harlan said. It's new and we're making mistakes as we go. But if you want to help, we could use it. What do you need? Money, mostly. We've got volunteers, but funding is tight. We've been running on donations and whatever we can scrape together, but it's not enough. Not for the long term. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her hand still on Scarlett's neck. Then she said, My mother had a property, a small piece of land about 20 miles from here. She bought it years ago, back when she and my dad were planning to build a house and keep horses. They never got around to it. After he died, she couldn't afford to develop it, so it just sat there. When she died, it passed to me. Harlan felt something shift in his chest. How much land? 15 acres. There's no house, no barn, nothing. Just land. It's been sitting empty. What are you planning to do with it? Sarah looked at him. I was going to sell it, pay off my student loans, maybe put a down payment on a real place. But then I found out about Scarlett and about what you're doing, and I started thinking, she paused, what if I didn't sell it? What if I gave it to your organization instead? Harlan stared at her. You're serious? I am. My mom wanted Scarlett to be safe. She wanted horses like her to have a place to go. If I sell that land, it just becomes someone's investment property or a housing development. But if I give it to you, it could be something that actually matters, something my mom would have wanted. Martha put a hand on Harlan's arm, her grip tight. He could feel her pulse racing. Harlan didn't know what to say. That's incredibly generous. But are you sure? That land has to be worth something. It's worth about $120,000, according to the assessor. But I don't care. I'd rather it go to something good than line my pockets. Sarah's voice was firm. My mom died thinking I didn't care about her or the things she loved. I can't fix that. But I can do this. I can make sure Scarlett and horses like her have a place to go. I can make sure other people don't end up in the same situation my mom was in. Harlan looked at Martha. She had tears in her eyes. If you're serious, Harlan said slowly, then we need to talk about what that would mean. We'd need to build infrastructure, barns, fencing, water systems. That takes money we don't have. How much? I don't know. Tens of thousands, probably, maybe more. Sarah nodded. Then we fundraise, we apply for grants, we get the community involved, whatever it takes. And you're okay with that? With your land being used for this? It's not my land anymore. It's theirs. Sarah looked at Scarlett. It's hers. They spent the next hour walking the property, talking through the logistics, the possibilities, the risks. Sarah asked questions, good questions, about how the organization was structured, how they made decisions, how they prioritized cases. Harlan answered as honestly as he could, not sugarcoating the challenges or the chaos. It's not perfect, he said. We argue about money. We disagree on which cases to take. We've made mistakes, and we'll make more. But we're trying. That's all we can do. That's more than most people, Sarah said. By the time she left, it was late afternoon. She hugged Scarlett goodbye, promised to be in touch about the land transfer, and drove away. Harlan and Martha stood in the driveway, watching her car disappear down the road. Did that really just happen? Martha asked. I think so. Harlan, do you understand what this means? 15 acres. That's enough for a real sanctuary. Enough to take in horses long term, not just patch them up and send them back. I know. We could build something permanent, something that lasts. Harlan nodded slowly. The weight of it was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a network anymore. This wasn't just a safety net for people in crisis. This was something bigger, something that could outlive him. It's going to cost a fortune, he said. Then we'll raise a fortune. We don't know how to do that. We'll learn. Harlan looked at her, and despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the overwhelming impossibility of it all, he smiled. You really think we can pull this off? I think we don't have a choice, Martha said. Not after what just happened. That girl gave us her mother's land because she believes in what we're doing. We can't let her down. No, Harlan said. We can't. That night, Harlan called an emergency meeting of the Hope Ridge Equine Support Committee. Eleanor, Tom, Evan Hewitt, and half a dozen others crammed into Harlan and Martha's living room, sitting on couches and folding chairs, mugs of coffee in their hands. Harlan told them about Sarah, about the land, about the opportunity in front of them. The room went silent. Then Tom Yates let out a low whistle. 15 acres, that's huge. It's more than huge, Eleanor said. It's a game changer, but it's also a massive responsibility. We're talking about building a full sanctuary from the ground up. That's not just fencing and shelters. That's water, electricity, drainage, permits, insurance, staffing. This is a multi-year project with a six-figure price tag. How much are we talking? Someone asked. Eleanor pulled out a notepad and started scribbling. Rough estimate? 200,000 to get it operational, maybe more. The room erupted. We don't have that kind of money. We can't even cover our current expenses half the time. This is insane. Harlan raised his hand and the room quieted. I know it sounds impossible, but think about what it means. Right now, we're helping people keep their horses. That's important, but there are still cases we can't handle. Horses that need long-term rehabilitation, animals that can't go back to their owners, situations where temporary help isn't enough. A sanctuary solves that. It gives us a place to take horses when there's nowhere else. But only if we can afford to build it, Eleanor said, and maintain it. A sanctuary isn't a one-time cost. It's an ongoing expense. Feed, vet care, staff, utilities. We'd need to bring in at least $50,000 a year just to keep it running. Then we raise $50,000 a year, Martha said. How? Grants, fundraisers, corporate sponsorships, donor campaigns. Martha looked around the room. We've already raised $20,000 in 2 months just from local donations. If we expand our reach, if we tell this story the right way, we can do this. Tom leaned forward. What story? Sarah's story, her mother's story, Scarlett's story. Martha's voice was steady. People respond to stories. They want to help when they see a real need, a real impact. We tell them about the woman who left her horse in a stranger's barn because she had no other choice. We tell them about the daughter who gave up $120,000 worth of land to honor her mother's memory. We tell them about the horses we've already saved and the ones we could save if we had the resources. That's the story, and it's a good one. The room was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. Thoughtful. Considering. Eleanor tapped her pen against her notepad. It could work, but we'd need to move fast. Land donations are tricky from a tax perspective, and we'd need to get everything formalized before the end of the year. We'd also need to put together a serious fundraising plan, not just asking for donations, but actively pursuing grants and partnerships. I can help with that, a woman named Diane said. She worked in development for a hospital in Ridgemont. I know how to write grant applications. I can reach out to some foundations I've worked with before. And I can talk to some of the businesses in town, Tom said. See if anyone's willing to sponsor the build. One by one, people started volunteering. Skills, connections, time. The impossible started to feel a little less impossible. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. Rough, incomplete, but real. They'd accept the land donation. They'd launch a capital campaign to raise the funds for construction. They'd apply for every grant they could find. They'd organize fundraisers, reach out to the media, build momentum. And if it worked, if they could pull this off, they'd have a sanctuary. A place where horses could heal. A place where people didn't have to choose between their animals and survival. As people filed out, Eleanor lingered behind. She waited until the room was empty, then turned to Harlan. You know what you're signing up for, right? She said. This isn't just a bigger version of what you've been doing. This is a whole different level. You're going to be running a facility, managing staff, dealing with regulations and inspections and liability. It's going to consume your life. I know. And you're still going to do it. Yeah, she'ita. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Good, because I think you might actually pull this off. Over the next few weeks, things moved faster than Harlan could have imagined. Sarah worked with a lawyer to transfer the land title to Hope Ridge Equine Support. Eleanor filed the paperwork to accept the donation and sent out grant applications to a dozen different foundations. Martha organized a fundraising dinner at the community center, selling tickets and auctioning off donated items. Diane reached out to her contacts, and within a week, they had two small grants, $10,000 from a local foundation, $5,000 from a feed company. The local paper ran another story, this one about Sarah and the land donation. A radio station picked it up. Then a regional news station sent a reporter out to interview Harlan and film Scarlett. The video went viral. Within days, donations started pouring in from across the state. Small amounts, mostly, $20 here, $50 there, but they added up. A week later, they got a check for $5,000 from a woman in another county who'd read the article and wanted to help. Then another for $3,000. Then another. By the end of the month, they'd raised $60,000. Harlan stood in the barn one evening, staring at the bank statement Eleanor had emailed him. The number didn't seem real. Martha came up beside him. "You okay?" "I don't know. It's happening so fast." "Too fast?" "Maybe. I don't know." He looked at her. "What if we can't do this? What if we raise all this money and then screw it up? Then we'll fix it. But we're not going to screw it up. You don't know that." "No, but I know you, and I know you don't quit." Harlan looked back at the statement. $60,000. People he'd never met, giving money to a cause they believed in, trusting him to do something good with it. The weight of it was staggering, but so was the possibility. A few days later, Harlan drove out to the land Sarah had donated. He'd been out there once before, years ago, when Sarah's parents had first bought it. Back then, it had been raw, just open land with scrub brush and rocky soil. It still looked mostly the same, but standing there now, Harlan could see something different. He could see pastures, barns, shelters, safe spaces where broken horses could heal. He walked the property, pacing out where things might go. A main barn here, paddocks there. Maybe a covered arena for rehabilitation work. A small office building near the road. It was overwhelming, but it was also exciting in a way he hadn't expected. His phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. "Got another grant. $15,000 from the Morrison Foundation. We're at $75,000. Harlan stared at the message. $75,000. They were over a third of the way there. He looked out across the empty land, and for the first time, he let himself believe it might actually happen. Another text came through, this one from Sarah. "How's it going?" Harlan typed back. "Good. Really good. Thank you for this. Thank my mom. She's the one who started it." Harlan thought about that. About the woman who'd left Scarlett in his barn. About the note she'd written with shaking hands. About the desperate hope that someone would do the right thing. She'd started it, but she'd never know how far it had gone. Or maybe she did. Maybe somewhere, somehow, she knew. Harlan didn't usually think about things like that. But standing on that empty land, with the wind moving through the grass and the sun sinking low on the horizon, he let himself hope that she did. He typed one more message. "We won't let her down." Sarah's response came quickly. "I know you won't." Harlan put his phone away and stood there a little longer, watching the light fade. Then he got in his truck and drove home, where Martha was waiting with dinner and a list of contractors who'd agreed to give them estimates on the build. There was work to do, a lot of it, more than he'd ever imagined. But for the first time in weeks, Harlan felt something close to certainty. They were going to make this happen. The land auction was supposed to happen in March. Sarah had mentioned it in passing during one of their planning meetings, some neighboring property that had gone into foreclosure, scheduled to sell at county auction on the 15th. Harlan hadn't thought much of it at the time. He'd been too focused on getting the sanctuary built, on managing contractors and volunteers, and the endless stream of details that came with trying to turn empty land into something real. But then Eleanor called him on a Tuesday morning, her voice tight with urgency. "Harlan, we need to talk about the Peterson property." "What about it?" "It's going up for auction next week, 20 acres adjacent to the land Sarah donated. And if we don't buy it, someone else will." Harlan set down his coffee cup. "Eleanor, we're already stretched thin. We've got 75,000 raised, and we need at least another 125 just to build what we planned. We can't afford to buy more land. We can't afford not to. That 20 acres has water access, a natural spring that runs year-round. Our 15 acres doesn't. We'd have to drill a well, and that alone would cost 30 to 40,000. But if we had the Peterson property, we wouldn't need to. Plus, 20 acres gives us room to expand down the line. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Harlan rubbed his face. How much is the property expected to go for? Minimum bid is $80,000, but it could go higher depending on who shows up. We don't have $80,000. We have $75,000, and we've got a week to raise the rest. Eleanor, I know what you're going to say, but think about it, Harlan. If we do this right, if we get that land, we're not just building a sanctuary. We're building something that can sustain itself, something that doesn't have to worry about water shortages or drilling costs or running out of space 5 years from now. Harlan looked out the window at the barn, where Scarlett was visible in her paddock, grazing peacefully. He thought about all the work they'd already done, all the money they'd raised, all the people who'd believed in this vision, and he thought about the risk of overextending, of reaching for too much and losing everything. I need to talk to Martha, he said. Talk fast. The auction's in 6 days. Harlan hung up and sat there for a long moment. Then he got up and went to find his wife. Martha was in the garden, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants. She looked up when she heard him coming. What's wrong? He told her. All of it. The Peterson property, the water access, the auction, the $80,000 they didn't have. Martha stood up slowly, wiping dirt from her hands. What do you think we should do? I think it's insane. I think we're already gambling with money that people trusted us with, and adding another $80,000 to that gamble is reckless. But Eleanor's right. The water alone makes it worth it, and if we don't get it, we're going to spend almost as much drilling a well anyway. Martha looked at him, her blue eyes steady. So what's stopping you? Fear, mostly. What if we raise the money for the auction and then don't win? What if we win and then can't finish the sanctuary build because we spent too much on land? What if... Harlan. Martha put her hand on his arm. You've been afraid this whole time. You were afraid when you found Scarlett. You were afraid when you started the network. You were afraid when Sarah offered you the land, and you did it anyway. So why stop now? Because the stakes keep getting higher. Yeah, they do, but so does the impact. Harlan looked at her, and something in him shifted. She was right. She was always right. Okay, he said. Let's do it. They called another emergency meeting that night. This time, nearly 30 people showed up, more than they'd ever had before. Word had spread about the sanctuary, and new volunteers had been joining almost weekly. Harlan stood at the front of the room and laid out the situation. We have 6 days to raise at least $5,000, he said. Ideally more, in case the bidding goes higher than $80,000. I know we're already asking a lot from this community, but if we can pull this off, we'll have everything we need to make this sanctuary work for the long term. Tom Yates spoke up. What happens if we don't get the land? Then we move forward with the original plan. Drill a well, work with what we have. It'll cost us more and limit our capacity, but it's doable. And if we get the land but run out of money to finish the build, then we fundraise more, or we build in stages, whatever it takes. A woman in the back raised her hand. What's the timeline on the build if we get both properties? Eleanor answered that one. If we start construction in April, we're looking at a fall opening, maybe October, if everything goes smoothly, which it won't. So let's say November. That's 8 months, someone said. Can we sustain operations that long without a facility? We'll have to, see, Martha said. We've been doing it so far. The room buzzed with conversation. Harlan let them talk, let them process. Finally, a man near the front stood up. Harlan didn't recognize him. He was younger, maybe in his 30s, with the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. My name's David Ortiz, the man said. I'm a contractor. I've been following what you're doing and I want to help. If you get that land, I'll donate my labor for the build. I can't give you money, but I can give you time. And I can bring in a crew who'll work for cost. Harlan stared at him. You're serious? Yeah, I grew up around horses. My family lost ours when I was a kid because we couldn't afford to keep them. I don't want other kids to go through that. So if you're building something that helps, I'm in. The room erupted in applause. David sat down, looking embarrassed but pleased. A woman stood up next. I'll match whatever David's labor would have cost in cash donations. If he's giving that much time, the least I can do is help pay for materials. Then another voice. I'll organize a fundraiser this weekend. Barbecue and silent auction. We can raise a few thousand easy. One by one, people committed. Money, time, resources. By the end of the meeting, they had pledges for another $8,000. Harlan stood at the front of the room, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Tom said. Just win that auction. The next 6 days were a blur. Martha and Eleanor organized the fundraiser, pulling in donated items and food from local businesses. The barbecue drew over 200 people, and by the end of the night, they'd raised another $6,000. Someone set up an online donation page, and contributions trickled in from across the state. $20 here, $50 there, one donation for $500 from an anonymous donor. By the morning of the auction, they had $92,000. Harlan barely slept the night before. He kept running numbers in his head, calculating risks, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if someone outbid them? What if the property had hidden problems they didn't know about? What if they won and then couldn't deliver on the sanctuary? At 4 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went to the barn. Scarlett was dozing in her stall, one hip cocked, her eyes half closed. When she heard him, she lifted her head and nickered softly. Harlan leaned against the stall door. You know this all started because of you, right? If your owner hadn't left you here, none of this would be happening. Scarlett just blinked at him. I don't know if that's good or bad, Harlan continued. Most days I think it's good. But right now, I'm terrified. We're about to bet everything on a piece of land we might not even get. And if it goes wrong, a lot of people are going to be disappointed. A lot of horses are going to suffer because I made the wrong call. Scarlett stepped forward and nuzzled his hand, her breath warm against his palm. Yeah, Harlan said quietly. I know. We do it anyway. The auction was held at the county courthouse at 10 a.m. Harlan arrived early with Martha, Eleanor, and Tom. The room was already filling up. Other bidders, local ranchers, a few real estate developers in suits. Harlan recognized some of them. Others were strangers. Eleanor leaned over. Stay calm. Don't bid early. Let them drive the price up a bit, then come in strong. What if it goes over 92? Then we go to 95. That's our absolute ceiling. After that, we walk away. Harlan nodded, but his stomach was in knots. The auctioneer took the podium at 10 sharp. He ran through the preliminaries, property description, minimum bid, terms of sale. Then he opened the bidding. We'll start at 80,000. Do I have 80? A man in the second row raised his hand. 80,000. Do I have 85? A woman near the back. 85. Do I have 90? A developer in a suit. The bidding moved fast. 90, 92, 95. Harlan's heart was pounding. They were already at their ceiling, and he hadn't even bid yet. Eleanor squeezed his arm. Wait. The auctioneer called for 98. No one moved. Going once at 95, going twice. 98, Harlan said, raising his hand. Every head in the room turned. The auctioneer nodded. 98,000. Do I have 100? The developer hesitated, then shook his head. Going once at 98. Going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. Sold to bidder 17 for $98,000. The room erupted in scattered applause. Harlan sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Martha grabbed his hand. We got it. We got it, Harlan repeated numbly. Eleanor was already on her feet, heading to the clerk's table to handle the paperwork. Tom clapped Harlan on the shoulder, grinning. You did it, man. You actually did it. Harlan looked around the room, at the strangers who were already filing out, at the life-changing decision he'd just made with a raised hand and 3 words. $98,000. They had 92 in the bank, which meant they were 6,000 short. He stood up on shaky legs and followed Eleanor to the clerk's desk. We need to arrange payment, Eleanor was saying. We have 92,000 available immediately. The remaining 6,000 we'll need to... I'll cover it. Harlan turned. Sarah Mitchell was standing behind him, checkbook in hand. Sarah, what are you doing here? I heard about the auction. Figured you might need backup. She opened the checkbook and started writing. 6,000, right? You don't have to do this. I know, but my mom would have wanted this land to be part of the sanctuary, and I'm not going to let $6,000 stand in the way. She tore out the check and handed it to the clerk. There. Done. Harlan couldn't speak. He just stared at her. This woman who'd already given up more than $100,000 in land value and was now handing over another $6,000 like it was nothing. Sarah saw his expression and smiled. Don't look at me like that. You've done more for my mom's memory than I ever could. This is the least I can do. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Just build something amazing. The paperwork took another hour. By the time they walked out of the courthouse, Hope Ridge Equine Support owned 35 acres of land and had less than $1,000 left in the bank. They were broke. They were terrified, and they were going to build a sanctuary. Construction started in April. David Ortiz and his crew showed up on a Monday morning with trucks and equipment ready to work. The first order of business was clearing the land, removing brush, leveling the ground where the barn would go, mapping out paddock areas. It was hard, dirty work, and Harlan was out there every day, working alongside the crew. Fundraising continued. Eleanor applied for more grants. Martha organized another event. Donations kept trickling in. Slowly, painfully, the money came together. By May, they had enough to start framing the main barn. By June, the structure was up. By July, they were working on fencing and paddocks. It wasn't smooth. There were delays, permits that took longer than expected, materials that arrived damaged, a week of rain that turned the construction site into a mud pit. There were arguments about design, about costs, about priorities. There were moments when Harlan was sure they'd bitten off more than they could chew. But the work continued, and the calls kept coming. Horses that needed help. Families in crisis. People who'd heard about Hope Ridge and wanted to know if there was space, if there was support, if there was hope. Not yet, Harlan told them, but soon. In August, they got a call from a woman named Patricia, whose horse had been neglected by a previous owner and seized by animal control. The horse was emaciated, covered in sores, terrified of people. Animal control was going to euthanize him if they couldn't find a placement within the week. Harlan stood in the half-finished barn, looking at the empty stalls that weren't quite ready, the paddocks that still needed gates, the water system that was only partially installed. We can't take him yet, Eleanor said. We're not ready. Then we get ready, Harlan said. They worked around the clock. David's crew installed the last of the fencing. Volunteers showed up to finish the stall doors, to connect the water lines, to lay gravel in the paddock. By the end of the week, one section of the barn was operational. They brought the horse in on a Friday. His name was Dusty, and he looked worse than Scarlet had. Ribs showing, hooves overgrown, eyes dull with resignation. He flinched when anyone came near him, and loading him into the trailer had taken 2 hours. But when they unloaded him at the sanctuary and led him into his stall, something changed. He stopped trembling. He looked around, his ears flicking forward, taking in the clean bedding, the fresh hay, the quiet. And for the first time since they'd found him, Dusty lowered his head and ate. Patricia stood outside the stall, tears running down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Harlan watched Dusty eat, and he felt something settle in his chest. They weren't finished yet. There was still so much work to do. But they were here. They were real. And they were helping. By September, the sanctuary was nearly complete. The main barn had 12 stalls, all of them ready. The paddocks were fenced and secure. The water system was operational. They'd built a small office near the entrance and a covered arena for rehabilitation work. There was still finishing work to be done, painting, landscaping, signage, but the bones were there. And they had 5 horses in residence. Dusty, still recovering but putting on weight. A mare named Bella, who'd foundered and needed long-term hoof care. A gelding named Charlie, who'd been abandoned by owners who'd left the state. A pony named Pip, who'd outgrown his family's ability to care for him. And Scarlet. Harlan had moved her to the sanctuary in July, once her stall was ready. She'd adjusted quickly, settling in like she'd always belonged there. Sometimes he'd find her standing at the fence, watching the other horses, her head high and her eyes bright. She looked content, at peace. One evening in late September, Harlan walked the property alone, taking inventory of everything they'd built. The barn gleaming in the fading light, the paddocks full of horses grazing quietly, the office where Eleanor managed the books and fielded calls from families who needed help. It was real, all of it. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. Sarah was walking up the driveway, her hands in her pockets. "Hey," she said. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. What brings you out here?" "I wanted to see it, the finished product." Harlan gestured around. "It's not quite finished. Still got some work to do, but it's close." Sarah looked around, taking it all in. The barn, the horses, the land her mother had bought decades ago, with dreams that had never materialized. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "My mom would have loved this. I wish she could have seen it." "Me too." Sarah walked over to the fence where Scarlett was standing, grazing peacefully. The mare looked up, recognized her, and walked over. Sarah stroked her neck, her eyes wet. "I've been thinking a lot about my mom, about the calls I didn't answer, the time I wasted being angry. I can't get that back, but this," she gestured at the sanctuary, "this feels like I'm doing something she would have been proud of." "You are," Harlan said. "You gave us the foundation to build this. Without you, none of it would exist. Without you, my mom's last wish wouldn't have mattered. You're the one who answered when she needed someone. You're the one who saved Scarlett. You're the one who turned a desperate act into something that's going to help hundreds of horses." Sarah looked at him. "Don't downplay that." Harlan didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. They stood there together, watching Scarlett graze as the sun sank lower on the horizon. After a while, Sarah spoke again. "I've been thinking about moving back here. To Prospect Ridge, I mean. My job in the city is remote now, so I could work from anywhere. And I want to be closer to this. To her." She nodded at Scarlett. "To what we're building." "We'd be lucky to have you." Sarah smiled. "I'll take that as a yes." The grand opening was set for the first Saturday in October. They'd sent out invitations, posted on social media, contacted the local media. Harlan hadn't expected much, maybe 50 people, mostly volunteers and donors who'd been part of the journey. Over 300 people showed up. They filled the driveway, the paddock areas, the space in front of the barn. Families with kids, ranchers in boots and hats, elderly couples, young professionals, people who'd donated money, people who'd volunteered time, people who'd just heard the story and wanted to see it for themselves. Harlan stood near the barn entrance, feeling completely overwhelmed. Martha squeezed his hand. "You ready?" she asked. "No." "Good. Let's go." Eleanor had set up a small podium near the barn. Harlan walked up to it, microphone in hand, and looked out at the crowd. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He just stood there, staring at all these people who'd believed in something that had started as a desperate note taped to a starving horse. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I'm not good at speeches, so I'm just going to tell you the truth. 4 months ago, I found a horse in my barn. I didn't know where she came from. I didn't know who she belonged to. All I had was a note from a woman who was dying, asking me to take care of the one thing she loved most in the world." The crowd was silent. I could have said no. I could have called animal control, handed the horse off, walked away, but I didn't. And the reason I didn't is because that note told me something important. It told me there are people out there who love their animals more than anything, but who don't have the resources or the support to keep them safe. And when those people run out of options, they do desperate things. They leave their horses in strangers' barns. They take them to auction. They make choices that haunt them for the rest of their lives. Harlan paused, looking out at the faces in front of him. The sanctuary exists because we decided that people shouldn't have to make those choices. We decided that there should be a place where horses can come when there's nowhere else. A place where families can get help before they're desperate. A place where love doesn't have to end just because money runs out. He gestured behind him at the barn, at the paddocks, at the horses grazing peacefully. This is that place. And it wouldn't exist without every single person here. The people who donated money. The people who volunteered time. The contractors who worked for cost. The woman who gave us her mother's land because she believed in what we were building. He looked at Sarah standing near the front of the crowd. She was crying. We named this place Scarlet Haven, Harlan continued, after the horse who started it all. The horse who reminded us that sometimes the smallest act of compassion can change everything. Thank you for being part of that change. Thank you for believing in this. And thank you for making sure that no one, human or animal, has to face the worst moments of their life alone. The crowd erupted in applause. Harlan stepped back from the podium, his hands shaking. Martha hugged him, and then Eleanor, and then Tom, and then people he didn't even know, all of them thanking him, congratulating him, telling him how much this meant. After the speeches, they opened the barn for tours. People walked through, looking at the stalls, meeting the horses, asking questions. Kids petted Pip the pony. Families took pictures with Scarlet. Dusty, who'd been terrified of people just 2 months ago, let a little girl brush his mane. At one point, Harlan found himself standing in the covered arena, watching a group of volunteers demonstrate some of the rehabilitation exercises they used with the horses. A man came up beside him, older, maybe in his 70s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "You did something good here," the man said. "Thank you. My wife and I lost our horse about 5 years ago, cancer. We couldn't afford the treatment, so we had to let her go. It broke my wife's heart. She hasn't been the same since." The man's voice was thick. "But seeing this place, knowing it exists now, it helps. It helps to know that other people won't have to go through what we did." Harlan didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded. The man shook his hand and walked away, and Harlan stood there alone, letting the weight of it all settle over him. The responsibility, the impact, the lives they'd touched and the lives they would touch. It was terrifying. It was humbling. And it was exactly what he was supposed to be doing. As the sun began to set and the crowd started to thin, Harlan walked out to the far pasture where Scarlet was grazing with Bella and Charlie. She looked up when she saw him, her ears pricked forward, and walked over to the fence. Harlan leaned against the rail. "You know, none of this was supposed to happen. I was just supposed to be a rancher, fix fences, feed chickens, mind my own business. But then you showed up and turned everything upside down." Scarlet nuzzled his hand, looking for treats. "I'm not complaining," Harlan continued. "I'm just saying you could have warned me." Behind him, he heard footsteps. He turned and saw Martha, Sarah, Eleanor, Tom, David, and a dozen other volunteers walking toward him. They gathered at the fence, looking out at the horses grazing peacefully in the fading light. "It's beautiful," Sarah said softly. "It is," Eleanor agreed. Tom put his hand on Harlan's shoulder. "You should be proud, man. This is something special." Harlan looked at all of them. These people who'd shown up, who'd believed, who'd worked themselves to exhaustion because they cared. "I couldn't have done it without you." "That's the point," Martha said. "You weren't supposed to do it alone." They stood there together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The horses grazed, the wind moved through the grass, and for the first time in months, Harlan felt something close to peace. This was bigger than him, bigger than any one person. It was a community coming together to solve a problem that had seemed impossible. It was proof that when people cared enough, when they showed up and did the work, real change was possible. And it had all started with one desperate woman and one starving horse, and a note that said, "Please don't let her die too." That night, after everyone had gone home and the sanctuary was quiet, Harlan sat in the small office with Martha. They were going through thank you notes, trying to acknowledge every person who'd contributed, when Harlan's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Boone, this is Lisa Harper. I'm calling from Centerville, about 200 miles east of you. I heard about your sanctuary and I need help. My gelding colic this morning, and I can't afford the surgery. I called 3 rescues and they're all full. Someone told me to try you. Is there any way—" Her voice broke. "Is there any way you can help?" Harlan looked at Martha. She was watching him, waiting. He thought about the empty stalls in the barn, about the fund they'd set aside for emergency cases, about the network of volunteers ready to step in when someone needed them. "Yeah," Harlan said. "We can help. Tell me where you are." He wrote down the address, promised to call her back within the hour, and hung up. Then he started making calls. To Hewitt, to Eleanor, to the volunteers on the emergency list. Within 30 minutes, they had a plan. A vet on standby, a trailer ready to go, funds allocated for surgery if needed. Martha watched him work, a small smile on her face. "What?" Harlan asked. "Nothing. I'm just proud of you." "We're not done yet. We're probably never going to be done." "I know, but that's okay. Some things aren't meant to be finished. They're just meant to keep going." Harlan looked at her, and he realized she was right. This wasn't a project with an end date. It was a commitment, a promise to keep showing up, to keep helping, to keep being the answer when someone asked the question he'd been asked 4 months ago. "Please don't let them die." And as long as there were horses that needed saving and families that needed support, Harlan would be there. They all would. Because that's what you did when you saw someone suffering and had the power to help. You showed up. You did the work. You made the choice to be part of the solution instead of walking away. It wasn't always easy. It wasn't always smooth. But it mattered. And that was enough. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, Harlan stood in the barn feeding the horses. Scarlet Haven now had 18 horses and residents, with a waiting list of families who needed temporary support. They'd hired 2 part-time staff members to help with daily care. Eleanor had secured 3 major grants for the coming year. And they'd started offering educational programs for local schools, teaching kids about responsible animal ownership and compassion. It was more than Harlan had ever imagined, more than he'd thought possible. As he was filling water buckets, he heard a car pull up outside. He walked to the barn entrance and saw Sarah getting out of her car, a large envelope in her hand. "Hey," she said, walking over. "Got something for you." "What is it?" She handed him the envelope. "Open it." Harlan opened it and pulled out a stack of papers, legal documents. He scanned them quickly, then looked up at Sarah in confusion. "These are deed transfer papers for another piece of property." 40 acres, Sarah said. "About 10 miles from here. It was another piece of land my parents bought years ago. I've been holding on to it, trying to figure out what to do with it, and I decided it should go to Scarlet Haven. You're going to need more space eventually. Might as well plan for it now." Harlan stared at her. "Sarah, this is too much." "It's not. It's exactly right." She smiled. "My mom spent her whole life loving animals and trying to do right by them. She ran out of time and resources, but her dream didn't have to die with her. This is her legacy, and I'm going to make damn sure it keeps growing." Harlan didn't know what to say, so he just hugged her. This woman who'd lost her mother and found a way to honor her memory by helping countless others avoid the same pain. When they pulled apart, Sarah was crying. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for saving Scarlet, for building this place, for giving me a way to make things right." "You already made things right, Harlan said. "The day you walked into that diner and decided to help instead of walking away." They stood there in the morning light, the barn behind them full of horses that were alive, because people had chosen compassion over convenience, generosity over greed, community over isolation. And Harlan thought about the note he still carried in his pocket, the one written by a dying woman who'd trusted a stranger to do the right thing. He pulled it out and read it one more time. "Her name is Scarlet. I'm dying. Please don't let her die too. I'm sorry for everything." He'd read those words 100 times, maybe more, but this time, something new occurred to him. The woman who'd written this note hadn't just been asking him to save a horse. She'd been asking him to save a piece of herself, the part that loved unconditionally, that gave without expecting anything in return, that believed in the fundamental goodness of strangers. And he had, not just for her, but for everyone who came after, for every family that called in desperation, for every horse that arrived broken and left whole, for every person who walked through the gates of Scarlet Haven and realized they weren't alone. That was the real legacy. Not the land or the buildings or even the horses. It was the reminder that there were still people who gave a damn, people who showed up, people who did the hard thing because it was the right thing. And once you knew those people existed, once you'd seen what they could do when they worked together, everything changed. Hope wasn't just a word anymore. It was a place. It was a choice. It was a promise that no matter how dark things got, there was always someone willing to light a candle. Harlan folded the note and put it back in his pocket. Then he turned and walked back into the barn, where 18 horses were waiting for breakfast and the day's work was just beginning. Martha met him inside carrying a load of hay. Lisa Harper's gelding is doing well, by the way. She called this morning. He's putting on weight and his colic hasn't returned. She wants to bring him here for a month of rehab once we have space. We'll make space, Harlan said. I figured you'd say that. Martha smiled and kissed his cheek. You're a good man, Harlan Boone. I'm just a man who answered a call when someone needed help. Yeah, and that's what makes you good. Outside, the sun was rising over the pasture, casting long shadows across the land. Scarlett stood at the fence, watching the new day begin, strong and healthy and alive. She was the horse that had started everything, the desperate gamble that had paid off in ways no one could have predicted. And as Harlan watched her standing there in the morning light, he realized that this, all of this, was what happened when one person chose kindness in a moment of crisis. When one person said yes instead of no. When one person decided that another life mattered enough to fight for. That choice rippled outward. It touched other lives, inspired other choices, created a wave of compassion that kept spreading long after the original act was forgotten. The woman who'd left Scarlett in his barn would never know how far that ripple had traveled. She died believing she'd run out of options, that her final act was a Hail Mary with no guarantee of success. But she'd been wrong. Her act of desperate trust had been the seed that grew into something extraordinary. A sanctuary. A community. A promise that no one would have to face the impossible alone. And that promise would endure. Long after Harlan was gone, long after everyone who'd helped build this place had moved on, Scarlet Haven would still be here, still helping, still saving, still proving that when people came together with open hearts and willing hands, miracles weren't just possible, they were inevitable. Harlan walked over to Scarlett's stall and stroked her neck. She leaned into his hand, her eyes half closed, content. You did good, he told her quietly. You survived when you shouldn't have. And because you did, all of this became possible. So thank you for trusting me, for hanging on, for showing me what really matters. Scarlett just breathed against his shoulder, warm and steady and real. And Harlan stood there with her as the morning light filled the barn, surrounded by the sound of horses eating and moving and living, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Certainty. This was right. This was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to do. The road ahead would be hard. There would be more late nights, more impossible decisions, more moments when the money ran out and the problems seemed insurmountable. But there would also be more horses saved, more families helped, more lives changed by the simple act of showing up when it mattered most. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.